The Gospel of Mark. The second Gospel initially held great importance in the early church but later on lost the importance to the other synoptics. However, ever since the advent of the historical critical method, there has been renewed interest in this Gospel. The two source theory has also awarded the second Gospel its rightful place in the New Testament. It is important for our study of this Gospel of Mark to approach it from various questions. Primordial among them would be to understand this short Gospel text as it is, that is, not in comparison with other Gospels, and to look at it in the full organic whole. Thus, we require deeper reading of the text and not to be influenced by what we know about Jesus from the other Gospel or from traditions. We must try as much as possible not to read into the text. So, this way of studying the gospel, that is, of trying to understand what the author originally intended by understanding who the author is, what type of community received the gospel, leaves much to be desired for many of us who read the gospels today. Apart from the burning question of who the historical Jesus really was and the image of Jesus, the second gospel writer tries to portray to us what we further need is to understand what this text can possibly imply for us today. What is God's revelation and message for the people of our time and for me in particular? This cannot but be a personal quest for each one of us, something each of us must grapple with as we read and reread the gospel text amidst our own life situations. Every time we return to the gospel, it will come alive with a renewed message for us today. To repeat what we have been saying so very often, to understand the Bible Gospels, all three levels must come into the play simultaneously. What is behind the text, the background? What is the message, the intended message? And what is in front of the text, our reading of it in the situation of today? What then is the central thrust of the second Gospel? What is its intended message? And how do we go about divining it? For most modern texts, we may find certain clues in its structure at the division into chapter, paragraph, verses, and titles. But the Gospel leaves us no such clues, for the division into verses and chapters came as late as the 16th century. And the original text did not have any division into paragraphs as it is today. We thus have to find a structure to understand this gospel. We shall return to this question later. But before we start to move on our journey, let us get the bare essentials out of the way and deal with the questions of authorship, the intended community, the location, and the date of composition. The authorship of Mark is traditionally said to be the second gospel attributed to Mark. The text at the beginning of the text appears to be around 150 CE. There are various ancient texts, example from the early church historian Eusebius, which suggest that Mark wrote the Gospel. Many Christian writers like Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Jerome attribute the authorship to Mark as well as to the close association with Peter. There is little doubt that Mark wrote the second Gospel, but all Mark was not a very key figure in the early church so as to attribute the Gospel to him. However, is Mark the same as Mark, John of Acts and the Mark of 1 Peter 5:13? Also Colossians 4:10, 2 Timothy 4:11 and Philemon 24. Mark's community. The nature of the gospel betrays the type of community the gospel was written to. We also get a fair idea of the problems and challenges faced by the community. But how do we do this? First of all, it is pretty clear that the gospel writer is a Greek speaker who was not an eyewitness of Jesus' ministry and made inexact statements of Palestine and geography. He drew on pre-shaped traditions about Jesus, oral or probably written, and addressed himself to a community that seemingly had undergone persecutions and failures. The community to which the gospel was written betrays a lot of the Semitic background. This can be inferred from the style, sentence structure, and the Semitic usage of the Greek that is used. Much more can be inferred about the community by just examining closely the travels and the places he visits. Jesus, the main character of the narrative, begins his ministry in Galilee, which is inhabited predominantly by Gentiles. Concentrates his ministry not in Jerusalem, the center of Jewish religion, but in villages and towns of Galilee, like Capernaum, Dalmanutha, etc., and makes sporadic visits to a few cities outside Galilee, like Gerasa in Decapolis, Tyre and Sidon in the province of Syria, and all infected, polluted by Gentiles. Caesarea Philippi, which is Panias near Luke Halua, at the extreme north of Galilee, is a notorious worship of a pagan god. Is the privileged place where Jesus unambiguously affirms that he is the suffering Messiah. His way from Caesarea Philippi is riddled with conflicts and confrontation between Jesus and the Jewish authorities. until the final conflict leading to his death. The risen Jesus proceeds to Galilee, where he had commenced his ministry and where the new Christian community was summoned to have a darshan on the risen Jesus. Thus, this Gospel of Mark betrays the anti-Jewish and simultaneously pro-Gentile inclinations. Although this is found in other Gospels too, why are they so pronounced in Mark? We can think of three reasons. The conflict that is arising in the early Christian community between two groups. One is strong bound with the Jewish religion, commonly known as the Jerusalem-centered Jewish Christianity, and the other is the increasing Gentile or Hellenistic Christianity. This is also reflected in Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul, especially the Galatians. The second reason could be the Christian community in Rome to which the Gospel was written was a persecuted community, especially under Nero. The community had undergone such a poignant experience of cruelty. It was in the light of this that the author of the second Gospel had to address a number of very significant, at the same time highly provocative and interlinked concerns, issues and problems. Of these, the most significant are the following. Firstly, Christians whose relatives and dear ones who had suffered immensely and have been brutally killed in the persecution were asked to suffer and even die rather than forsake their faith in Christ. To highlight this, Mark has portrayed a pessimistic, even a scandalous portrait of the disciples. In contrast, Jesus remains firm in his mission till the very end. The second reason could be assuring the Roman authority that even though Christians were thoroughly misunderstood and barbarously persecuted, they do not nurture hatred against the Romans or the Gentiles. In addition to opting for a pro-Gentile Christianity, he presents Jesus very open to, concerned about, appreciative of Gentiles on one side, and tries to appease and exonerate the Romans on the other. Apart from numerous references, notice how it is a centurion, an official of the Roman, who confesses Jesus as the Son of God for the first time. Moreover, the Gospel shows that Christians do not hold Romans responsible for the death of Jesus or blaming the Jews. Pilate merely followed the decision of the Sanhedrin. Third reason could be they no longer belong to the Jewish fold but do not have their own identity, priority and values which are different. The fourthly would be the problems and tension within the community, lack of care and concerns for the little ones, the oppressed at one level and the craze for power at another level. Fifth would be constructing an appropriate gospel genre which would be well accepted by all, such as memory of Jesus remain alive among the community. Just imagine Bible only contained the letters of St. Paul and the other epistles. What would have happened? Location. To determine the place of composition, a number of criterions are used, both internal and external to the gospel. The general consensus agrees with the early tradition and assigns the second gospel to Rome. There are various internal criteria. In addition to Mark's option for a pro-Gentile horizon and theology, the following points reinforce the view that it was composed in Italy, presumably in Rome. The first reason could be by quoting the Old Testament, the evangelist as a whole has the recourse to the Septuagint rather than the Hebrew Bible. Second, the author uses a number of Latin technical terms connected with the army, the legion, the praetorium in 1516, centurion in 1539, the courts, spectacle later in 627, the flagellaire in 1515 and the commence, denarius in 1215, the quadrants in 1242. Although such terms were common within the empire, twice common Greek expressions are explained by Latin ones, like 2 copper coins, which makes a quadrans, the palace, that is the praetorium. The quadrants are not in circulation in the East. The next question that we have is about the need to explain the Palestinian customs and practices and to translate Arabic words and expressions preserved in the tradition. It is found in many verses, including the simple Abba, which Paul had used while writing to the Christian community in Rome. And finally, the fact that this gospel got such an authority throughout the empire, so much so that Matthew and Luke based themselves on it, it is because of the prominence of the Roman Church. Most probably after the death of Peter and Paul, who died during Nero's persecution in 64 CE, the upper limit can be placed before the Gospels of Matthew and Luke were written. People would narrow it down to around 68 to 73 CE. Was it before the destruction of the temple in 71 CE or after the fall of Jerusalem? What is the meaning of Mark 13:14? Is it a prediction of the immediate fall of Jerusalem or merely a reporting of the fall projected backwards? In conclusion, while the gospel may have been written in another time, another place, it has continued to inspire millions down the centuries. Why is this? We can scarcely escape the realization that the time of Jesus was not very different from our own times. The social condition of that day were pretty much like ours: the extreme poverty, the internalized religion, a caste and class system which leaves our society divided. Even the conditions of the community to which Mark wrote this gospel is similar to us in India. We live in a land where Christianity is not a majority and there is a plurality of other religions. We are often looked upon suspiciously and quite often persecuted in various parts of India. Quite often in the church also we are power hungry and do not care at all. What would Jesus have done in India today? It is my feeling that if Jesus appeared today, he would scarcely recognize him. We would be eating with the sinners, the prostitutes, and those very people we despise. We would blame him for associating with bad people. We would be dancing, singing, drinking at weddings and other parties. We would be breaking all the church laws and sharing his Eucharist with other denominations. His social teaching of giving up everything, like he told the young man, would be too hard for all of us. He would practically cause a riot in society and in the church today. What would Jesus tell us about globalization or the refugees or the huge amounts of money spent on war and destruction? Well, nothing being said about farmer suicide. Yes, the parable of the Grand Inquisitor by Dostoevsky in his book The Brothers Karamazov would be repeated again. The second gospel was radical enough for its first readers and similarly challenges us in every way to be authentic and radical followers of Jesus.